Minutes before my daughter's engagement party, my future son-in-law walked into my study, dropped a leather portfolio on my desk, and said, "Sign the lake house over to us tonight, or Melissa hears you never approved of this wedding." Then my daughter appeared in the doorway behind him, arms crossed, and added, "If you humiliate us in front of 80 guests, don't expect me to invite you to anything again." I looked at the portfolio. I did not open it. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it back down exactly where it had been. Then I smiled. 4 days later, their entire arrangement started coming apart at the seams. If that opening already has your jaw tight, stick with me, because it gets worse before it gets better. I'm Walter, and before we go further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of these, and I want to know who's sitting with me for this. Some names and details in this story have been adjusted for privacy, but everything that matters, the choices, the consequences, all of it happened the way I'm about to tell you. The study still smelled like the cedar shelves I'd built myself 30 years ago, back when Diane was alive and we used to sit in here on Sunday evenings with the radio on low. I'd been in that room for maybe 10 minutes, adjusting my cufflinks, running through the toast I planned to give later that night, when the door opened without so much as a knock. Trent walked in first. Broad shoulders, a suit that fit too well for a man who'd only had steady work for 18 months, and a smile that had always looked slightly rehearsed to me, like something he'd practiced in a mirror. My daughter Melissa came in behind him, already dressed for the party, pearl earrings I'd given her for her 30th birthday, catching the lamplight. Trent set the portfolio down on my desk the way a man sets down a winning hand of cards. "Let's not waste each other's time tonight, Walter," he said. 80 people are downstairs already. The caterers are setting up. Everybody's waiting on the toast." He pulled out the chair across from mine and sat without being asked. "I've been patient, genuinely patient. But tonight's the night we settle this." "Settle what?" I said. I kept my voice even. 41 years running a construction supply company teaches you that the moment you raise your voice, you've already lost the room. "The lake house," he said, tapping 2 fingers on the folder. "Sign it over tonight, and everything moves forward exactly the way it should. You walk Melissa down the aisle in June. You give your toast tonight like the proud father everybody expects. Nobody has to know anything unpleasant. And if I don't..." Melissa stepped forward then, and there was something in her face that didn't look like my daughter, not the girl I'd raised, not the young woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives. "Then I go downstairs," she said, "and I tell everyone the engagement's off, and that it's because my father couldn't be happy for me. You'll be the man who ruined my wedding before it even started, Dad. People don't forget that." I looked at the two of them for a long moment. Then I stood up, buttoned my jacket, picked up the portfolio without opening it, and said, "I need some air." I walked past them, down the back stairs, out through the kitchen door, past the caterers setting up trays of shrimp cocktail, and into the cool October evening. I did not go to the party. I got in my truck and drove home, and somewhere behind me I could hear Melissa's voice rising, sharp and panicked, calling my name into the dark. I want to tell you honestly that I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the portfolio in front of me, unopened, for almost 2 hours before I finally undid the clasp. Inside was a property assessment for the lake house up on Cedar Hollow, the one Diane and I bought in 1994, the one where Melissa learned to swim, where we scattered a small portion of Diane's ashes off the end of the dock 4 years ago. The assessment was recent, very recent, dated 11 days earlier. Someone had already had the property appraised without my knowledge, and stapled behind it was a quitclaim deed with my name typed in, waiting only for a signature. I sat with that for a long while. Then I noticed something else tucked in the back pocket of the folder, a printed email chain. I hadn't been meant to see it. I understood that even as I started reading. It was between Trent and a man named Roy Bellwether, someone I vaguely remembered as a business associate of Trent's from before he and Melissa had gotten serious. The subject line read, "Cedar Hollow Timeline." In it, Trent explained that once the property was transferred to us, meaning him and Melissa, he intended to subdivide the lakefront parcel and sell 2 of the 3 lots to Roy's development group, keeping the original cabin for himself as what he called the family showpiece. The number attached to the deal was just under $2 million. Melissa's name appeared nowhere in the financial details, not once. I called my old friend Arthur Chen that night. Arthur had been my attorney for almost 20 years, since before he'd made partner at his firm, back when he was still doing wills and small business contracts out of a converted garage. "Walter," he said, picking up on the second ring even though it was past 11. "What's wrong?" "I'm looking at a deed with my name on it that I never signed," I said, "and an email that makes me think my daughter doesn't know what her fiancé is planning to do with my property." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Don't sign anything," he finally said. "Don't confront anyone yet either. Bring everything to my office tomorrow morning. First thing, how bad do you think this is?" "I think," Arthur said slowly, "that you need to let me actually look at it before either of us decides how bad." I didn't sleep much after that call either. I sat in the dark kitchen thinking about the boy Trent had been when Melissa first brought him home 3 years ago. Polite, a little nervous, brought a bottle of wine and asked good questions about my company. I thought about how much I'd wanted to like him, how badly I'd wanted Melissa to have found someone steady after her first engagement had fallen apart so painfully. I had given him the benefit of every doubt I had left in me. Page 4 of that email chain told a very different story. The next morning, Arthur's office smelled like coffee and old paper, the same as it always had. He'd laid the deed and the appraisal and the email chain out across his desk in a neat row, like evidence at a trial, which I suppose in some sense it already was. "The appraisal is legitimate," Arthur said. "Licensed appraiser, proper documentation, but you never ordered it. And you never authorized anyone to walk that property with an assessor." He tapped the quitclaim deed. "This is a standard transfer document. If you'd signed it last night, the property would have left your name and entered joint ownership between you, Melissa, and Trent, but only for 90 days. There's a secondary clause here, buried in paragraph 6, that automatically transfers full ownership to Trent alone if, quote, either co-owner becomes unable to fulfill fiduciary responsibilities related to the property." Meaning what, exactly? You. Meaning if you'd had a medical event, a stroke, a decline in capacity, anything that could be framed as you becoming unable to fulfill responsibilities. Even Melissa's name would eventually fall away under the right circumstances. If he structured it that way. Arthur looked up at me. "Walter, I don't say this lightly. This isn't sloppy paperwork. Someone drafted this carefully." I sat back in the chair Diane used to tease me for slouching in. "Does Melissa know any of this?" "I don't know," Arthur said. "But I think you need to find out. And I think you need to find out very, very carefully." That was a Tuesday. I didn't call Melissa. I didn't call Trent. Instead, I called my sister-in-law, Carol, who had worked in property records for the county for almost 30 years before retiring, and I asked her, as a favor, to look into whether anyone had filed anything else related to Cedar Hollow in the past year. She called me back 2 days later, on Thursday, her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard from Carol since her own husband's illness. "Walter," she said, "there's a filing from 4 months ago. An easement request on the access road to the property, filed under Trent's name. And Walter, there's a second document, a financial power of attorney application, filed with the county recorder's office, naming Trent as your designated agent in the event of incapacitation. It hasn't been activated. It's sitting there, waiting." Huh. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and staring out the window at the maple tree Diane had planted the year Melissa was born, and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the particular stillness that comes right before a man decides something he can't take back. "I never signed a power of attorney form," I said. "I know," Carol said quietly. "I looked at the signature myself, Walter. It doesn't match yours. Not even close. I want to be honest with you here, because this story could make it sound like I moved quickly and decisively from that point forward, like some kind of quiet action hero. I didn't. I spent that whole Friday doing almost nothing. I sat in my recliner. I made coffee I didn't drink. I looked at old photographs of Melissa as a little girl on that dock at Cedar Hollow, missing her front teeth, laughing at something just out of frame. I thought about how a person raises a child for 18 years hoping they'll turn out steady and kind, and then spends the next 15 watching, sometimes helplessly, as the world and the people in it shape them into something you don't always recognize. It was Arthur who called me that evening and got me moving again. "I had someone run the forgery through a document examiner today," he said. "It's not amateur work, Walter. Whoever did this had access to real samples of your signature. I need you to think who has documents with your actual signature on them. Bank forms, old contracts, anything." I thought about it for a long moment, and then it hit me with the force of something physical. The company. I said. 11 years ago, when I stepped back from day-to-day operations, I signed a stack of authorization documents for the transition. Trent did some contract IT work for us that year, setting up the new filing system. He would have had access to the archive room. Arthur was quiet on the other end of the line. That's not proof, he finally said. But it's a place to start looking. The following Monday, I met Arthur and a forensic accountant named Priya Nair at Arthur's office. Priya had a laptop and 3 manila folders in the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had seen every kind of family financial mess there was to see. I pulled county records, banking disclosures where possible, and the digital access logs from the timeline Carol found. She said, "Walter, I need you to sit down for this part." I sat. 18 months ago, a shell company was registered under the name Hollow Ridge Holdings, Priya said. Trent Ashford is listed as the managing member. 6 months after that, Hollow Ridge Holdings opened a business line of credit, using Cedar Hollow's most recent tax-assessed value as collateral documentation, even though at that point, the property was still solely in your name, and there was no legal transfer on file that would have permitted that. She slid a printed statement across the table. The credit line is for $480,000. 40% of it has already been drawn. I stared at the number for a long time. He borrowed against a house he doesn't own. He borrowed against a house he was in the process of arranging to own, Priya said gently. The timeline suggests he expected to have the actual transfer completed before the bank started asking harder questions. I thought about Melissa's face in the doorway of my study that night, the way she'd said, "Don't expect me to invite you to anything again," and I wondered, with a kind of grief I hadn't expected, how much of that anger had been her own, and how much of it had been fed to her, one careful conversation at a time, by a man who'd been building this architecture for a year and a half. "I need to know if my daughter is part of this," I said. "Not eventually. Now." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then it's time we found out." Carefully. I called Melissa that Wednesday and asked her to come to lunch. Just the two of us. No Trent. She sounded surprised, a little guarded, but she came. We sat at the same diner we used to go to after her Saturday morning swim lessons when she was 9 years old, back when the world was smaller and simpler and I still believed I could protect her from everything just by showing up. "Dad," she said, before I'd even ordered coffee, "if this is about the lake house again." "It's not about the lake house," I said. "It's about you." "Melissa, did you know Trent applied for a business line of credit using Cedar Hollow as collateral?" She went very still. "What are you talking about?" I watched her face carefully as I laid it out: the shell company, the credit line, the forged power of attorney application sitting dormant at the county office, the quitclaim deed with the buried clause that would have eventually cut her out entirely if Trent structured the paperwork the way he'd already begun to. I watched every piece of color drain slowly out of her face. "That's not," he told me. "The credit line was for his consulting business," she said, her voice cracking in a way that told me this was not performance. "He told me the appraisal was just so we'd know what the property was worth for insurance purposes." "Dad, I didn't. There would never." She stopped, pressed her hand flat against her mouth, and I watched my daughter, 32 years old, realize in real time that the man she was 6 weeks from marrying had been quietly building a structure designed to take everything from her father, and eventually, if the language in that deed meant what Arthur said it meant, from her too. "I need to see everything," she said finally, her voice steadier than I expected. "All of it. Tonight." That was the turning point, though I didn't fully understand it yet. Melissa did not go home to Trent that night. She stayed at my house, in her old childhood bedroom, and we sat together at the kitchen table going through Priya's folders page by page while the coffee went cold between us. Around midnight, she looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was small, not anger, not embarrassment, but something rawer than either. "I called off the wedding 2 hours ago," she said quietly. I texted him. "I know that's not brave. I couldn't do it in person yet. I will, but I couldn't tonight." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, the way I used to when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. "That was still brave," I said. "Braver than a lot of people manage." The next 10 days moved faster than I expected. Arthur filed a formal complaint regarding the forged power of attorney application, which triggered an investigation through the county recorder's fraud unit. Priya's financial documentation went, with Melissa's full cooperation, to both the bank that had issued Hollow Ridge Holdings its credit line and to a detective named Marcus Whitfield, who specialized in financial exploitation cases involving family members. Trent, it turned out, had done something almost identical 2 years earlier with a previous girlfriend's family, a detail that surfaced once Detective Whitfield started pulling threads. A smaller scheme, never fully prosecuted, but documented enough to establish a pattern. There was one night, about a week into all of this, when I woke at nearly 2 in the morning to the sound of my side gate latch lifting. I lay still in the dark for a moment, my heart going harder than I liked to admit. And then I got up, quietly, and looked out the window above the sink. It was Trent, standing in my backyard, looking up at the house with an expression I couldn't read from that distance. He didn't try the door. He stood there for almost a full minute, and then he left the way he'd come. I called Detective Whitfield first thing the next morning. 2 days after that, I had the locks changed on every door in the house, front and back, and I felt foolish for not having done it sooner. And I said so to Whitfield, who told me gently that it was an extremely common thing to overlook, that people rarely think to protect the inside of their own lives until something has already tried to get in. Trent was arrested 6 weeks later. The charges included attempted forgery of a government-recorded legal document and fraud related to the falsified collateral used to secure the business credit line. He was not, in the end, charged with anything connected to Melissa directly, because the investigation made clear she had known nothing until the night I told her a fact. Detective Whitfield confirmed formally, in writing, which mattered more to Melissa than I think she let on, because it meant the record itself would say, permanently, that she hadn't been part of it. I want to tell you about the last conversation Melissa and I had before I'm going to close this story out, because I think it matters more than anything that happened with the deed, or the credit line, or the arrest. It was a Sunday evening, almost 8 weeks after that night in my study. We were sitting out on the dock at Cedar Hollow, the actual lake house, the one that never left my name, the one where she'd learned to swim, and the water was doing that flat gold thing it does right before the sun goes down completely. "I keep thinking about what I said to you that night," Melissa said. "About not inviting you to anything again. I keep thinking about how easily I said it. How sure I sounded. You were scared," I said. "Scared and being managed by someone who was very good at making you scared. That's generous of you." "It's true," I said. "But I want to say something else too, and I want you to actually hear it, not just accept it to make me feel better." I looked out at the water for a moment before I continued. "I wasn't a perfect father to you, Melissa. I gave you things instead of time, for a lot of years after your mother died. I thought if I kept the lights on and the tuition paid and never missed a birthday, that counted as being present. I never sat you down and asked you the hard questions about how you were really doing, what you were really scared of, why your first engagement fell apart the way it did. I let providing for you stand in for actually knowing you. And I think that gap, that space where the real conversations should have been, is exactly the space Trent found room to work inside." Melissa didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she used to on long car rides home from swim meets, and we sat there together until the light was almost gone. I signed new estate paperwork 3 weeks after that, with Arthur's help. Not out of anger, though I won't pretend there wasn't some of that left in me. The lake house stays in my name for now, with a clear, clean, properly filed provision that it passes to Melissa outright. No conditions, no buried clauses, the day I'm no longer here to hold it myself. I also set aside a portion of my estate to establish a small legal fund, modest but real, to help older adults in our county who find themselves facing exactly what I nearly faced: quiet financial maneuvering by people who were supposed to love them. I am not a perfect father. I want to say that plainly, because I know a story like this can make a man sound wiser and steadier than he actually was living through it. I waited too long to ask my daughter the real questions. I let comfort stand in for connection for more years than I'm proud of. And by the time I understood the difference, the cost of that mistake had already started working its way into the foundation of things. If there's one thing I'd want another father or mother listening tonight to take from this, it isn't the part about the deed, or the forged signature, or even the arrest. It's this: do not wait for a crisis to have the honest conversation with the people you love. Family protection doesn't start with a lawyer's office. It starts at the kitchen table, years earlier, with the harder questions asked gently and often. I believe, and I've lived long enough now to mean this all the way through, that we aren't given our children to hold on to forever. We're given them to prepare, as best we can, and then to trust. And sometimes that trust gets tested in ways we never saw coming. Every family carries some version of a night like the one in my study, I hope yours never comes. But if it does, I hope you remember that smiling and walking out the door isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the very first step toward getting your family back. What would you have done in that study, the night the folder hit the desk? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, every night. And I'd like to know I'm not the only one who stood somewhere close to that moment. If this story meant something to you, pass it along to somebody who might need to hear it tonight. And if you'd like to be here the next time I have one of these to tell, stay close, you know where to find me. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.